The figure of Cerdic emerges from the mists of early medieval history as one of the most enigmatic and contested personalities of post-Roman Britain. His name alone presents historians with their first puzzle, as Cerdic appears distinctly British rather than Germanic in origin, deriving from the Celtic Caraticus or Cerdic, rather than following typical Anglo-Saxon naming conventions. This linguistic anomaly has sparked decades of scholarly debate regarding his true heritage and the circumstances that brought him to prominence in the turbulent landscape of 5th and 6th century southern Britain. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, compiled centuries after Cerdic's death during the reign of Alfred the Great, presents him as the founding father of the West Saxon dynasty, claiming he landed at Cerdica Sora, possibly modern-day Calshot or Toton, in 495 AD with his son Cynric and 5 ships filled with warriors. However, modern archaeological and linguistic analysis suggests a far more complex reality than this straightforward narrative of Germanic conquest. The Chronicle's account, written with the political agenda of legitimising later Wessex kings, likely simplified or mythologized Cerdic's actual origins and rise to power. Archaeological evidence from the Southampton water region and the Upper Thames Valley reveals a pattern of cultural interaction, rather than wholesale replacement during the 5th and 6th centuries. Excavations at sites like Portchester and Winchester show continuity in settlement patterns alongside the gradual adoption of Germanic material culture. This suggests that figures like Cerdic may have operated within existing Romano-British power structures rather than simply conquering virgin territory. The discovery of mixed burial practices, combining Germanic grave goods with Romano-British traditions, points to a society where cultural boundaries were fluid and political alliances crossed ethnic lines. The political landscape that Cerdic entered was one of unprecedented fragmentation and opportunity. Following the withdrawal of the last Roman legions around 410 AD, Britain had experienced nearly a century of gradual political disintegration. The centralised Roman administrative system, which had governed the island for nearly 4 centuries, collapsed piece by piece as local strongmen, Romano-British nobles, and incoming Germanic groups carved out territories and spheres of influence. By the late 5th century, the concept of unified Roman Britain existed only in memory. In the south, the situation was particularly complex. The Romano-British kingdoms that emerged from the imperial collapse maintained varying degrees of Roman administrative practice and cultural identity. Archaeological evidence from Hampshire and the Thames Valley suggests that some Romano-British elites continued to exercise authority from fortified hill forts and former Roman towns well into the 6th century. These leaders faced constant pressure from multiple directions: Irish raiders from the west, Pictish incursions from the north, and increasing numbers of Germanic settlers establishing themselves along the eastern and southern coasts. The military landscape of post-Roman Britain created unique opportunities for ambitious leaders, regardless of their ethnic background. Traditional Roman military organisation had given way to smaller, more flexible war bands led by charismatic chieftains. These groups, typically numbering between 50 and 200 warriors, could move rapidly across the countryside, forming temporary alliances or engaging in opportunistic raids as circumstances dictated. Success in this environment depended more on personal leadership, tactical acumen, and the ability to reward followers than on inherited authority or administrative competence. Cerdic's possible continental origins remain a subject of intense scholarly investigation. The name Gevis, used to describe his followers and later adopted as an alternative designation for the West Saxons, provides crucial clues about his background. Some historians argue that the Gevis represented a specific tribal confederation from the Germanic territories, possibly originating in the region between the Weser and Elbe rivers. Archaeological parallels between burial practices and metalwork styles found in Hampshire and those discovered in Lower Saxony and Schleswig-Holstein support this theory. However, the evidence is far from conclusive. Recent excavations at Sutton Hoo and other Anglo-Saxon sites have revealed the extent to which Germanic material culture spread through trade networks and cultural exchange, rather than solely through migration. The presence of Saxon-style brooches, weapons and pottery in a burial does not necessarily indicate the ethnic identity of the deceased. This complexity extends to understanding Cerdic's own background, as he may have been a Romano-British leader who adopted Germanic military practices and material culture to enhance his authority and attract followers. The socio-economic factors driving Saxon migration and settlement in the 5th and 6th centuries created the conditions that enabled Cerdic's rise to prominence. Continental Europe experienced significant population pressures during this period, as rising sea levels inundated coastal settlements in Frisia and the Low Countries. Simultaneously, the expansion of Slavic peoples from the east displaced Germanic tribes, creating a domino effect of migration westward toward the North Sea coast. Climate data from ice cores and pollen analysis indicates that the late 5th and early 6th centuries witnessed a period of cooling and increased precipitation, which would have affected agricultural productivity across northern Europe. These environmental pressures, combined with political instability following the collapse of Hunnic power after Attila's death in 453 AD, created ideal conditions for population movement toward Britain's relatively stable and fertile lands. The economic opportunities available in post-Roman Britain were substantial for those willing to seize them. The withdrawal of Roman administration had disrupted traditional trade networks and tax collection systems, but it had also removed the military forces that previously restricted unauthorised settlement. Large tracts of agricultural land lay underutilised, as the Romano-British population struggled to maintain the intensive farming systems established under imperial rule. For Germanic settlers, whether arriving as invited mercenaries, independent raiders, or refugee populations, Britain offered the prospect of land ownership and economic advancement impossible to achieve in their overcrowded homelands. The monetary system provides additional insight into the economic transformation of post-Roman Britain. Roman coinage circulation effectively ceased by the mid-5th century, replaced by a complex system of barter, tribute and gift exchange that favoured military leaders capable of acquiring and redistributing wealth through raiding and conquest. This shift advantaged figures like Cerdic, whose success in warfare could translate directly into economic power and political influence. Archaeological evidence from the Upper Thames Valley in Hampshire suggests that Cerdic operated within this transformed economic landscape as both predator and protector. Excavations at sites like Dorchester-on-Thames reveal evidence of both destruction and continuity during the late 5th and early 6th centuries. Some Romano-British settlements show signs of violent abandonment, while others display gradual cultural transformation suggesting negotiated accommodation with new, Germanic overlords. The process of land acquisition during this period involved complex negotiations between incoming Germanic groups and established Romano-British landowners. Legal documents from contemporary Gaul and later Anglo-Saxon law codes suggest that territorial arrangements often involved formal agreements rather than simple conquest. Germanic leaders might receive grants of land and authority in exchange for military service, protection from raiders, or tribute payments to Romano-British kings. Cerdic's position within these networks of exchange and obligation remains unclear, but his subsequent success in establishing a lasting kingdom suggests he possessed exceptional skills in navigation of both military and diplomatic challenges. The territories he ultimately controlled, stretching from the Solent to the Upper Thames, represented some of the most economically valuable land in post-Roman Britain, combining fertile agricultural areas with strategic positions along major river systems and ancient roadways. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle's entry for 495 AD marks a pivotal moment in British history with stark simplicity. Her common Cerdic O&D Sinric his Sunu on Breton mid D Skypum. In this year came Cerdic and Sinric his son to Britain with 5 ships. This deceptively straightforward account conceals layers of complexity regarding one of the most significant territorial conquests in post-Roman Britain. The location identified as Cerdic, where Cerdic allegedly made his first landfall, has generated extensive scholarly debate, with modern historians proposing sites ranging from Totton near Southampton Water to various points along the Solent shoreline. Archaeological investigations along the Southampton Water have revealed compelling evidence for late 5th century activity that aligns with the chronicle's dating. Excavations near modern Totton have uncovered Germanic-style metalwork and pottery sherds dating to approximately 490, 510 AD, suggesting sustained settlement rather than temporary raiding. The site's strategic advantages would have been immediately apparent to any experienced military commander. Deep water access for ships, elevated ground for defensive positions, and proximity to both the ancient Roman road network and fertile agricultural lands of the Hampshire Basin. The choice of landing site reflects sophisticated tactical planning that contradicts simplistic narratives of barbarian invasion. Cerdica's position provided access to multiple river systems including the Test and Itchen, offering inland penetration routes while maintaining secure retreat paths to the sea. Contemporary Germanic military practice emphasized mobility and flexibility, with successful commanders maintaining multiple operational bases to avoid becoming trapped by superior enemy forces. The archaeological record suggests Cerdic established several fortified positions across the region rather than relying on a single stronghold. The composition of Cerdic's initial force, described as arriving in 5 ships, requires careful analysis given the chronicle's tendency toward symbolic rather than literal accuracy. Germanic longships of the period typically carried between 30 and 50 warriors, along with their essential equipment and supplies. This suggests Cerdic's initial warband numbered approximately 150, 250 men, a force large enough to establish territorial control, but small enough to maintain tactical mobility. Archaeological evidence from contemporary Germanic settlements indicates these forces included not only warriors, but also craftsmen, farmers, and other specialists necessary for establishing permanent communities. The warrior culture that Cerdic brought to Britain represented a sophisticated military tradition developed over centuries of continental warfare. Germanic war leaders of the period operated within complex networks of personal loyalty and obligation, binding followers through oaths of mutual support and promises of shared plunder. Archaeological discoveries of high-status burial goods from early 6th century Hampshire graves reveal the material wealth that successful military service could provide. Pattern-welded swords, ornate shield bosses, gold and garnet jewellery, and imported luxury items from across Europe. The tactical advantages of Germanic military organisation became apparent in the challenging terrain of post-Roman Britain. Unlike the rigid formations favoured by Roman legions, Germanic warbands emphasised individual warrior prowess within flexible group structures. Warriors fought in loose formations that could rapidly adapt to changing battlefield conditions, using terrain features and psychological warfare to maximum advantage. The famous Germanic battle cry, designed to intimidate enemies and coordinate attacks, proved particularly effective against Romano-British forces accustomed to more formal military protocols. Weapon technology played a crucial role in Cerdic's military success. Archaeological analysis of 6th century Germanic weapons reveals sophisticated metallurgical techniques that produce superior blades compared to most Romano-British equipment. Pattern-welded swords, created by forge-welding iron and steel strips, provided exceptional strength and flexibility while maintaining sharp cutting edges. The distinctive angular shield bosses found in Germanic graves offered superior protection against both slashing and thrusting attacks, while serving as offensive weapons in close combat. The first major recorded engagement of Cerdic's conquest appears in the Chronicle's entry for 508 AD, describing a battle at Cerdic where Cerdic and Cynric killed a British king named Natan Leod and 5,000 men with him. Modern historians have proposed various locations for this encounter, with sites along the River Avon near Fordingbridge, receiving particular attention due to archaeological evidence of early 6th century conflict. The scale of casualties reported by the Chronicle almost certainly represents exaggeration, but the strategic importance of controlling river crossings cannot be overstated in the military geography of post-Roman Britain. River fords represented critical choke points in the transportation network of early medieval Britain, where small forces could effectively control the movement of much larger armies. The Romano-British road system, while still partially functional, required regular maintenance that many post-imperial kingdoms could not afford. Rivers thus served as both barriers and highways, with control of crossing points determining territorial boundaries and trade routes. Cerdic's apparent focus on securing major fords suggests sophisticated understanding of strategic geography that extended beyond simple raiding tactics. The identity of Natan Leod, the British king allegedly killed at Cerdic, remains historically problematic. No contemporary sources mention this ruler, and the name itself may represent a later chronicle compiler's attempt to provide specific details for a more general account of British resistance. However, the pattern of Germanic-British conflict described in the entry aligns with archaeological evidence of widespread violence during the early 6th century. Excavations at several Hampshire sites have revealed destruction layers dating to this period, along with unburied human remains suggesting sudden, violent abandonment. The Battle of Cerdic in 519 AD marked another crucial milestone in the establishment of Saxon control over southern Britain. The Chronicle records that Cerdic and Cynric obtained the Kingdom of the West Saxons following this engagement, suggesting it represented a decisive victory rather than simply another raid. Archaeological investigations have proposed Charford in Hampshire as the most likely location for Cerdic, based on place name evidence and the discovery of early 6th century military equipment in the vicinity. The strategic significance of Cerdic extended beyond immediate military victory to encompass the broader transformation of political authority in post-Roman Britain. Germanic concepts of kingship differed fundamentally from Romano-British traditions, emphasizing personal charisma and military success over inherited authority or administrative competence. The Chronicle's statement that Cerdic and Cynric obtained the kingdom reflects this Germanic understanding of rulership as something actively seized rather than passively inherited. The resistance Cerdic encountered from Romano-British kingdoms reveals the continued vitality of post-imperial political structures well into the 6th century. Archaeological evidence from sites like Old Sarum and Cadbury Castle demonstrates that British leaders maintained sophisticated defensive capabilities, including the refortification of Iron Age hill forts and the construction of new earthwork defences. These fortifications required substantial labour forces and organisational capacity, indicating that Romano-British kingdoms retained significant resources despite the collapse of imperial administration. British defensive strategies during this period emphasised the use of existing Roman infrastructure combined with traditional Celtic military practices. Hadrian's Wall and other frontier fortifications had fallen into disrepair, but many Romano-British leaders adapted Roman military engineering techniques to create new defensive systems suited to changed circumstances. The reoccupation of hill forts like South Cadbury and Cadbury Congresbury reflects a strategic withdrawal from indefensible lowland positions to more secure elevated sites that could withstand extended sieges. The military tactics employed by Romano-British forces against Germanic invaders drew upon both Roman and Celtic traditions. Contemporary sources describe British armies that included both mounted warriors fighting in the Celtic tradition and infantry units maintaining Roman-style discipline and equipment. This tactical flexibility proved effective in many engagements, as evidenced by the Germanic practice of avoiding direct confrontation with large British armies in favour of rapid raids against isolated settlements. The psychological dimensions of warfare played an increasingly important role as the conflict progressed. Germanic warbands employed terror tactics designed to undermine British civilian morale and encourage submission without costly battles. Archaeological evidence of destroyed settlements and unburied corpses suggests these tactics achieved considerable success in demoralising British resistance. Conversely, British leaders attempted to maintain popular support through displays of effective leadership and successful defence of key population centres. The adaptation of Germanic military practices to British terrain conditions required significant tactical innovation. The heavily forested landscape of early medieval Britain differed markedly from the open plains where Germanic warriors had developed their traditional fighting techniques. Successful commanders like Cerdic learned to exploit dense woodland for ambush tactics, while avoiding the cavalry charges that had proven so effective on continental battlefields. The logistics of maintaining military campaigns in post-Roman Britain presented constant challenges for both Germanic and British forces. The collapse of Roman supply systems meant that armies had to rely on local provisioning, creating intense competition for agricultural resources. Archaeological evidence suggests that control of grain storage facilities and livestock herds often determined the outcome of military campaigns more than battlefield prowess alone. The gradual expansion of Cerdic's territorial control followed patterns established by successful Germanic leaders across post-Roman Europe. Rather than attempting to hold large contiguous territories, early Saxon kingdoms consisted of networks of fortified settlements connected by river systems and ancient roadways. This distributed approach to territorial control allowed small Germanic forces to maintain authority over much larger British populations while preserving tactical mobility essential for continued military success. The integration of conquered British populations into emerging Saxon political structures required careful negotiation between competing cultural traditions and legal systems. Archaeological evidence suggests that many Romano-British elites maintained their positions under Saxon overlordship, providing administrative expertise in exchange for continued local authority. This pragmatic approach to conquest ensured political stability while allowing Germanic leaders to focus on military expansion rather than day-to-day governance. The economic foundations of Cerdic's expanding kingdom rested on control of both agricultural production and long-distance trade networks. The Hampshire Basin's fertile soils supported dense populations that could provide tribute and military service, while access to the Solent enabled continued contact with continental Germanic territories. Archaeological discoveries of imported goods in early Saxon graves demonstrate the continued vitality of cross-channel trade despite political fragmentation. The transformation of Cerdic's warband from a mobile raiding force into the foundational structure of a permanent kingdom represented one of the most significant political developments in post-Roman Britain. The establishment of Wessex around 519 AD marks not merely another territorial conquest, but the creation of an entirely new model of governance that would influence English political development for centuries. Unlike the Romano-British kingdoms that sought to maintain imperial administrative traditions, Cerdic's Wessex emerged as a distinctly Germanic political entity adapted to the unique conditions of early medieval Britain. The territorial boundaries of early Wessex reflected both strategic military considerations and practical administrative limitations. Archaeological evidence suggests that Cerdic's initial kingdom encompassed the fertile river valleys of the Test, Itchen and Avon, extending northward from the Solent coast to the chalk downs of central Hampshire. This core territory provided essential agricultural resources while maintaining access to continental trade networks through Southampton Water. The kingdom's eastern boundary likely followed the watershed between the Test and the rivers flowing toward the Thames, creating a natural defensive barrier against potential Saxon rivals in Surrey and Kent. The northern frontier of early Wessex presents more complex territorial dynamics. Excavations at sites like Dorchester-on-Thames reveal evidence of Saxon settlement dating to the early 6th century, suggesting that Cerdic's influence extended along the Thames Valley considerably earlier than traditional narratives suggest. However, the archaeological record indicates a gradual process of territorial expansion rather than sudden conquest, with Saxon settlements appearing alongside continuing Romano-British occupation at many sites. This pattern suggests that early Wessex boundaries remained fluid, expanding and contracting based on military success and diplomatic arrangements with neighbouring powers. The administrative structures that emerged within Cerdic's kingdom represented a sophisticated adaptation of Germanic political traditions to the challenges of governing settled agricultural populations. Unlike the purely military hierarchy of a warband, territorial kingship required systems for collecting tribute, administering justice, and coordinating defence across dispersed settlements. Archaeological evidence from high-status burial sites indicates the emergence of a ranked nobility beneath Cerdic, with regional leaders controlling specific river valleys or downs while acknowledging his overall authority. The development of royal centres within early Wessex followed patterns established across Germanic Europe, with kings maintaining multiple residences rather than single, fixed capitals. Excavations at Winchester have revealed evidence of early 6th century Saxon occupation, including the construction of timber halls and the establishment of craft workshops producing high-status metalwork and jewellery. Similar archaeological signatures appear at sites throughout the Hampshire Basin, suggesting that Cerdic established a network of royal estates that could support his court during periodic visits while maintaining local administrative functions. The physical infrastructure of these early royal centres reflected both Germanic architectural traditions and adaptation to British conditions. Timber hall construction followed continental Germanic patterns, with massive oak posts supporting high-pitched roofs designed to accommodate large gatherings of warriors and nobles. However, British sites show innovations in foundation techniques and defensive arrangements that suggest local experimentation with traditional building methods. Archaeological reconstruction of these halls indicates structures capable of housing several hundred people during major assemblies, reflecting the social and political functions of royal hospitality and Germanic kingship. The gradual development of power centres throughout Wessex created a distributed administrative system that proved remarkably resilient to external threats. Rather than concentrating all royal authority at a single location, Cerdic's kingdom operated through networks of personal loyalty, connecting regional nobles to the king through reciprocal obligations of military service and material support. This system allowed rapid mobilization of military resources while preventing the kind of catastrophic collapse that could result from the capture or destruction of a single royal stronghold. Cerdic's approach to kingship drew heavily upon Germanic concepts of warrior leadership that emphasized personal charisma and military prowess over inherited authority or administrative competence. Archaeological evidence from royal burial sites reveals the material symbols of this warrior ideology: pattern-welded swords with elaborate hilts, ornate shield bosses bearing intricate decorative patterns, and gold and garnet jewellery displaying sophisticated craftsmanship. These objects serve not merely as personal possessions, but as visible demonstrations of royal power and success in warfare. The gift-giving culture that formed the economic foundation of Germanic kingship required constant acquisition of wealth through raiding, tribute collection, and trade. Cerdic's success in establishing a permanent kingdom depended upon his ability to provide his followers with regular distributions of valuable goods that maintained their loyalty and attracted new warriors to his service. Archaeological discoveries of imported luxury items in early Saxon graves demonstrate the continued vitality of continental trade networks that supplied British Germanic kingdoms with prestige goods essential for maintaining political authority. The development of early Anglo-Saxon royal ideology under Cerdic's leadership represented a synthesis of Germanic warrior traditions with adaptations to British political conditions. Unlike continental Germanic kings, who ruled primarily through personal relationships with warrior followers, territorial kingship in Britain required accommodation with existing Romano-British populations and institutions. This necessity led to the gradual development of more complex concepts of royal authority that incorporated elements of both Germanic and British political traditions. The role of kinship in legitimizing royal authority took on particular importance in Cerdic's kingdom, where Germanic concepts of dynastic succession had to be adapted to the realities of conquest and settlement. The prominence given to Cynric in chronicle accounts reflects not merely familial affection, but the political necessity of establishing hereditary claims to royal authority. Archaeological evidence suggests that other family members also received high-status burials with rich grave goods, indicating the emergence of a royal dynasty with multiple potential successors rather than simple father-to-son inheritance. The integration of religious authority into royal power presented ongoing challenges for Cerdic's kingdom as Germanic pagan traditions encountered both Romano-British Christianity and surviving Celtic religious practices. Archaeological evidence from early Saxon burial sites reveals complex patterns of religious syncretism, with Christian symbols appearing alongside traditional Germanic grave goods. This religious complexity required careful political management to avoid alienating different segments of the population while maintaining the supernatural authority that Germanic kingship traditionally derived from divine favour. The diplomatic relationships that Cerdic established with neighbouring Saxon kingdoms reflected both competitive rivalry and pragmatic cooperation in the face of continuing British resistance. Archaeological evidence suggests regular contact between early Wessex and the kingdoms of Kent, Sussex and Essex, with similar material culture appearing across southeastern Britain despite political fragmentation. These connections facilitated the exchange of military techniques, craft technologies and luxury goods, while creating opportunities for marriage alliances and mutual defence agreements. The relationship between Wessex and Kent proved particularly complex due to Kent's earlier establishment and more developed administrative structures. Kentish kings like Ethelbert had already established diplomatic relations with continental powers and adopted Roman administrative practices that gave them significant advantages in international relations. Cerdic's kingdom, by contrast, remained more closely tied to Germanic warrior traditions, creating potential conflicts over territorial boundaries and trading rights in the Thames estuary. Sussex presented different diplomatic challenges due to its geographic position between Wessex and Kent. Archaeological evidence suggests that the South Saxon kingdom maintained closer cultural ties to continental Germanic territories than either of its neighbours, with burial practices and material culture showing strong similarities to contemporary sites in northern Germany and Denmark. This continental orientation created opportunities for cooperation with Wessex in maintaining trade networks, while also generating competition for control of channel ports and inland territories. The emerging Kingdom of Essex, controlling the Thames Valley north of Kent, represented both opportunity and threat for Cerdic's expanding territory. The archaeological record indicates significant Saxon settlement along the upper Thames by the early 6th century, with some sites showing material culture similarities to early Wessex settlements. This suggests possible population movement between the two regions or common continental origins for their ruling dynasties. However, territorial expansion by either kingdom necessarily brought them into conflict over control of river crossings and agricultural lands in the Thames Valley. The diplomatic relationships with remaining British territories required even more complex negotiations, as these kingdoms maintained different political traditions and legal systems than their Saxon neighbours. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Romano-British kingdoms successfully adapted to the changing political landscape by adopting Germanic military practices while maintaining their territorial independence. These hybrid political entities created buffer zones between Saxon kingdoms while serving as potential allies or enemies, depending on shifting military circumstances. The economic foundations of early Wessex rested upon the integration of Germanic agricultural practices with existing Romano-British farming systems. Archaeological evidence from rural settlement sites reveals the gradual transformation of villa-based agricultural production into the scattered farmsteads characteristic of early medieval England. This transition involved both the abandonment of some Romano-British sites and the establishment of new Saxon settlements, creating a mixed landscape of continuing and new agricultural exploitation. The agricultural settlement patterns that emerged under Cerdic's rule reflected both practical considerations and cultural preferences inherited from continental Germanic territories. Saxon settlers showed strong preferences for river valley locations that provided both fertile alluvial soils and access to water transportation. Archaeological surveys of the Hampshire Basin reveal dense concentrations of early Saxon settlements along the Test, Itchen and Avon valleys, with secondary settlements extending onto the Chalk Downs, where sheep farming provided wool for textile production. The integration of Saxon and British populations under Cerdic's rule created complex social hierarchies that combined Germanic concepts of personal freedom with Romano-British traditions of agricultural tenancy. Archaeological evidence suggests that many Romano-British farmers continued working the same lands under Saxon overlordship, providing agricultural surplus in exchange for protection and the right to maintain their traditional settlements. This pragmatic approach to population management ensured agricultural continuity while allowing Saxon warriors to focus on military activities rather than farming. The development of trade networks under early Wessex rule revealed the kingdom's integration into broader European economic systems, despite political fragmentation. Archaeological discoveries of imported goods in Saxon graves include glass vessels from the Rhineland, garnets from India or Sri Lanka, and amber from the Baltic region. These luxury items reached Britain through complex trading networks that connected the North Sea and Channel coasts with continental river systems extending deep into Europe. The control of trade routes became increasingly important for maintaining royal authority as Cerdic's kingdom developed more sophisticated administrative structures. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Saxon kings exercised direct control over certain high-value trade goods, particularly weapons and luxury metalwork, while allowing local communities to manage agricultural production and basic craft activities. This selective economic intervention allowed royal courts to maintain the flow of prestige goods essential for gift-giving, while avoiding the administrative burden of managing all economic activity. The monetary systems that operated within early Wessex reflected the kingdom's position between the Romano-British tradition of coined money and Germanic practices of barter and gift exchange. Archaeological evidence indicates that Roman coins continue to circulate in some contexts well into the 6th century, particularly for high-value transactions involving land transfers or tribute payments. However, the majority of economic activity operated through systems of reciprocal obligation and material exchange that emphasized personal relationships over abstract monetary values. The craft production systems that developed under Cerdic's rule combined Germanic technical traditions with Romano-British manufacturing infrastructure. Archaeological excavations at Winchester and other royal centres reveal evidence of specialised workshops producing weapons, jewellery, and textiles for elite consumption. These workshops employed both Saxon and British craftsmen, creating opportunities for technological exchange that enhanced the quality and variety of goods available to the royal court and its supporters. The territorial expansion of Wessex under Cerdic's rule followed strategic patterns that reflected both military opportunities and economic necessities. Archaeological evidence suggests that Saxon settlement expanded primarily along river valleys that provided transportation routes and fertile agricultural land, while avoiding heavily forested areas that offered little economic value and presented defensive challenges. This selective approach to territorial acquisition created a kingdom with strong economic foundations, but potentially vulnerable frontiers in less densely settled regions. The death of Cerdic in 534 AD marked the end of an era that had fundamentally transformed the political landscape of southern Britain. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Cerdic ruled for 39 years, establishing not merely a kingdom but a dynastic tradition that would endure for centuries. The circumstances surrounding his death remain shrouded in the same historical ambiguity that characterises much of his reign, with the Chronicle providing only the bare chronological framework. Her Fordfurder Cerdic, Owendi Cynric his Sunu Rixode Ford. In this year died Cerdic, and Cynric his son ruled thereafter. The succession of Cynric to his father's throne represented a crucial moment in the development of Anglo-Saxon kingship, marking one of the earliest documented instances of hereditary succession among the Germanic kingdoms of Britain. Archaeological evidence from high-status burial sites dating to the mid-6th century suggests that the transition of power occurred smoothly, without the internal conflicts that often accompanied royal deaths in this period. The continuity of material culture and settlement patterns across the succession indicates that Cynric had already assumed significant administrative responsibilities during his father's final years, ensuring stability during the vulnerable period following Cerdic's death. The establishment of dynastic succession under the House of Cerdic represented a significant departure from traditional Germanic practices of elective kingship, where royal authority typically passed to the most capable warrior among the deceased king's relatives or close followers. The successful hereditary transition from Cerdic to Cynric established a precedent that would influence Anglo-Saxon political development throughout the early medieval period. Archaeological evidence from contemporary royal burial sites across Saxon England suggests that other Germanic kingdoms closely observed the Wessex succession, with several adopting similar hereditary practices during the following decades. The development of early concepts of hereditary kingship in Wessex required careful balance between Germanic traditions of warrior leadership and the practical necessities of governing settled territories. Cynric's succession involved not merely the inheritance of royal title but the assumption of complex networks of personal loyalty, territorial control, and diplomatic relationships that his father had established over nearly 4 decades. Archaeological evidence from royal centres like Winchester reveals continuity in administrative practices and ceremonial functions, suggesting that the succession involved formal recognition by the kingdom's noble class rather than automatic inheritance. The legitimacy of Cynric's claim to royal authority rested upon multiple foundations that reflected the hybrid nature of early Anglo-Saxon kingship. His status as Cerdic's son provided the hereditary justification increasingly accepted among Germanic peoples, while his documented participation in military campaigns demonstrated the warrior credentials essential for maintaining the loyalty of Saxon nobles. Contemporary burial evidence suggests that Cynric had already established his own network of followers and military retainers, creating a power base independent of his father's direct authority, while remaining subordinate to the established royal hierarchy. The territorial extent of the kingdom that Cynric inherited had expanded significantly during Cerdic's final years, encompassing much of modern Hampshire, southern Wiltshire, and portions of Dorset and Berkshire. Archaeological surveys reveal a sophisticated administrative system that divided this territory into regions controlled by appointed nobles who owed military service and tribute to the royal court. The smooth functioning of this system during the succession crisis demonstrates the institutional maturity that Wessex had achieved under Cerdic's leadership, transforming from a simple warband into a complex territorial state capable of surviving dynastic transitions. The diplomatic relationships that Cynric inherited included both formal alliances and ongoing conflicts with neighbouring Saxon kingdoms and surviving British territories. Archaeological evidence suggests that the succession period witnessed increased diplomatic activity as neighbouring rulers tested the new king's resolve and capability. However, the absence of major military campaigns during Cynric's early reign indicates that Wessex's military reputation remained sufficiently formidable to deter opportunistic attacks during the vulnerable succession period. The historical reliability of Cerdic's story as preserved in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle presents one of the most challenging problems in early medieval British historiography. The Chronicle, compiled during the late 9th century under the patronage of Alfred the Great, served multiple purposes beyond simple historical record-keeping. Its account of Cerdic's reign functioned as foundational mythology for the West Saxon royal house, legitimising Alfred's authority by connecting his dynasty to the heroic age of Saxon conquest and settlement. The political context surrounding the Chronicle's composition significantly influenced its treatment of Cerdic's story. Alfred's kingdom faced existential threats from Viking invasions that had destroyed most other Anglo-Saxon royal dynasties, making the demonstration of West Saxon legitimacy and continuity essential for maintaining popular support and noble loyalty. The Chronicle's emphasis on Cerdic's military victories and successful establishment of dynastic rule served to reinforce contemporary beliefs about the divine favour and inherent superiority of Alfred's lineage. Archaeological evidence reveals significant discrepancies between the Chronicle's narrative and the material record of early Saxon settlement in southern Britain. The Chronicle's account of rapid conquest and wholesale displacement of Romano-British populations contradicts excavation evidence showing gradual cultural transformation and continued occupation of many sites throughout the 6th century. These discrepancies suggest that later chroniclers simplified or mythologized the actual process of Saxon settlement to create a more dramatic and politically useful narrative. The chronological framework provided by the Chronicle for Cerdic's reign also presents problems when compared to archaeological dating evidence. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from early Saxon sites often produces date ranges that overlap but do not precisely align with the Chronicle's specific year-by-year account. This temporal uncertainty reflects both the limitations of early medieval record-keeping and the likelihood that chronicle compilers interpolated specific dates into oral traditions that originally preserved only general chronological relationships. The names and genealogies recorded in the Chronicle reveal additional layers of later mythologization and political manipulation. The appearance of obviously legendary figures in Cerdic's supposed ancestry, including connections to Germanic gods and heroes, indicates that chronicle compilers drew upon traditional genealogical poetry that served ceremonial rather than historical purposes. These mythological elements function to enhance royal prestige by connecting contemporary rulers to the supernatural realm, but they significantly compromise the historical reliability of chronicle accounts. Modern scholarly analysis of the chronicle's sources reveals a complex process of compilation that involved multiple written and oral traditions, some dating to the 6th and 7th centuries, but others clearly composed much later. The linguistic analysis of chronicle entries demonstrates that accounts of Cerdic's reign underwent multiple revisions and expansions, with later scribes adding details and explanations that reflected contemporary political concerns rather than historical accuracy. This layered composition process makes it extremely difficult to isolate authentic early traditions from later embellishments. The archaeological record provides a more reliable foundation for understanding Cerdic's historical role, though it presents its own interpretive challenges. Excavation evidence clearly demonstrates significant cultural change in southern Britain during the late 5th and early 6th centuries, with the appearance of Germanic material culture, burial practices and settlement patterns. However, This archaeological transformation occurred gradually over several generations rather than through the rapid conquest described in chronicle accounts. The broader narrative of Anglo-Saxon settlement within which Cerdic's story is embedded reflects fundamental changes in post-Roman British society that extended far beyond military conquest. Archaeological evidence reveals complex processes of cultural interaction, population movement, and political reorganisation that transformed Britain from a Romano-British province into a collection of Germanic kingdoms. Cerdic's role within this transformation appears to have been significant but not unique, representing one of many successful Germanic leaders who established territorial control during the post-imperial period. The influence of Cerdic's kingdom on subsequent West Saxon expansion proved foundational to the eventual emergence of England as a unified political entity. The territorial boundaries, administrative practices, and diplomatic relationships established during his reign provided the framework for later West Saxon expansion under rulers like Ceawlin, Cynegils, and ultimately Alfred the Great. Archaeological evidence traces the continuity of royal centres, trade networks, and settlement patterns from Cerdic's time through the height of the Wessex kingdom, demonstrating the enduring impact of his political innovations. The identity formation that occurred within early Wessex under Cerdic's leadership created a distinctive Saxon culture that combined Germanic traditions with adaptations to British conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals the development of characteristic West Saxon art styles, burial customs, and material culture that distinguished the kingdom from its Saxon neighbours, while maintaining connections to continental Germanic territories. This cultural distinctiveness proved essential for maintaining internal cohesion and external recognition throughout the kingdom's subsequent expansion. Modern archaeological reassessment of Cerdic's reign has benefited from significant methodological advances in excavation techniques, dating methods, and comparative analysis. Recent discoveries at sites like Sutton Hoo, Prittlewell, and Staffordshire have revolutionised understanding of early Anglo-Saxon material culture, revealing levels of artistic sophistication and international connection previously unrecognised. These findings have prompted reassessment of earlier excavations in Hampshire and the Thames Valley, leading to more nuanced interpretations of the archaeological evidence for Cerdic's period. Radiocarbon dating refinements have provided more precise chronological frameworks for understanding the timing and pace of Saxon settlement in southern Britain. Recent analysis of organic materials from key sites has confirmed that significant Germanic settlement occurred during the late 5th century, supporting the general chronological framework provided by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, while revealing greater complexity in the settlement process than traditional narrative suggested. Environmental archaeology has contributed new insights into the economic and ecological context of Cerdic's reign through analysis of pollen samples, animal bones, and plant remains from contemporary sites. These studies reveal patterns of agricultural intensification, woodland clearance, and livestock management that indicate significant population growth and economic development during the early 6th century. The environmental evidence supports interpretations of Saxon settlement as involving substantial population transfer rather than simple elite replacement of Romano-British leadership. Scholarly debates about the nature of early Anglo-Saxon settlement continue to evolve as new evidence emerges and interpretive frameworks develop. Recent emphasis on migration period complexity has challenged earlier models of wholesale population replacement, highlighting instead the varied processes through which Germanic culture became established in post-Roman Britain. Cerdic's reign is now understood within this broader context of cultural transformation that involved negotiation, adaptation, and synthesis rather than simple conquest and displacement. The place of Cerdic within the complex process of cultural transformation in early medieval Britain reflects broader patterns of political change that characterised post-Roman Europe. Similar processes of Germanic settlement and kingdom formation occurred throughout the former Western Roman Empire, from the Visigothic kingdom in Spain to the Lombard territories in Italy. Comparative analysis reveals that successful Germanic leaders like Cerdic shared common strategies for establishing territorial control while adapting to local conditions and existing political structures. The legacy of Cerdic's reign extended far beyond the immediate boundaries of early Wessex to influence the development of English political culture, legal traditions, and national identity. The dynastic principle established through his succession by Cynric provided the foundation for centuries of West Saxon royal authority that ultimately unified England under Alfred the Great and his successors. The territorial framework, administrative practices and cultural innovations of early Wessex became integral components of English civilization that endured long after the Norman conquest transformed the political landscape once again. The figure of Cerdic thus emerges from historical analysis as both a specific individual whose actions shaped the course of British history and a representative of the broader transformation that created Anglo-Saxon England. While the details of his life remain obscured by limited sources and later mythologization, his historical significance as founder of the most successful Anglo-Saxon dynasty cannot be disputed. The kingdom he established provided the political foundation for the eventual unification of England, making Cerdic one of the most consequential figures in the formation of English national identity, despite the persistent mysteries surrounding his origins, methods, and personal character.